One of the stumbling blocks to scratch building before people get started is that they assume they got to make every single little part perfectly first. No, you don't. Like you build on strips like this, like, and then you just lay it on, right? Like that was glued on, and I overrun, 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 overrun. Nibble off later, nibble off later, and then everything comes out beautiful and square, right? Okay, so I want to talk to you about skinning these 7/8 wooden dowels. They're poplar, so evergreen plastic doesn't have tubes this size, and these piles there's one on each side of the ramp in front of the hydraulic stands, and then there's these that line alongside between the shore and where the barge comes in, and they're actually models in themselves. They have a lot of gear, nautical gear hanging off them, and ladders, and even bird nests and stuff like that. So they make really cool models. So I want to basically wrap them in 10 thou thick sheet, number 9010 by Evergreen. And how I'm going to do that is I'm going to use actual CA to do it. Okay. Now I know most of you know I don't care for CA, but I do use it where I think it's appropriate. And this particular poplar wood, you put a bead of CA on here, medium in this case, and then touch a sanded surface of this on. Oh man, it's not coming off. So you got to get it lined up right first, right? So what I've done is I just took the dowel with a square, okay, and then drew a line up, okay, so that when I line this up, and notice how I oversized it too. I mean, you don't need to do it by that much, but that was just the width of the sheet. And then and the reason why you have it overrun on each side, in case you have a little bit of run out, in case you don't get it straight. At least when it wraps, you can, because you're going to trim all this off and then cap the ends, right? Okay, so that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a bead there and then glue that first, and then let it kick or dry, and then I'm going to roll it. Okay. Okay, so I just run a bead of CA on there, just rough sand this surface. And all I'm going to do is lay this edge of this right on here like this, on this line. Like that. Okay, so we've glued this first sheet, just the edge, right, with CA. And remember what I said about doing this to the surface of the CA to knock the sheen off? It'll make a huge difference, especially with CA. Not only solvent, but CA. It just really grabs, like really grabs. That's a little trick that I've used for years for when you're gluing styrene plastic to styrene plastic or styrene plastic to wood. Okay, so that's on there, right? Now what you can do here is you can run another bead a third of the way or halfway and then roll it again. Okay? Or you can just run a bead right here at the seam and just roll it completely over and then hold it over top of the seam for 10 or 15 seconds. And then if you've cut this right so it doesn't overlap, then you should have a little bit of a gap there, just so you get it nice and flush, right? Okay. Like in this one here, you can see I've done it part way. So this is what I'll do. I'll show you. So I'm going to run a bead right in here so it sits in that seam good. Okay. I'm going to roll it like this. And I'm going to hold it tight on that seam. Anyway, so there you go, see? Look at that nice seam there. This is the best one. Like, here's my first one that I did before the video. Look, see? I blew it apart here because I glued it to the table. That one's not bad either. But it's always good to make a few extras. Okay, so we'll clean up the overrun here. Okay. Nice sharp knife. I like to take it back, not all the way to the top of the dowel. This one got kind of blown out. Keep all that. And then I'll just run this bottom side on the into the water, just build up some barnacles around this here, just to, I mean, I can cover that too, right? So what I'm going to do here is just sand that flush like that, okay? And then I got some of this 20 thou. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take just a spot of CA for the wood to plastic as a type of clamp. And then I'm going to sit it on here like this. Okay. And then I'm going to take some solvent, just weld the outside of it. Be surprised how often some of your scratch building projects will require big tubes and pipes like this, like overpasses, things like that, right? If you build it yourself, if you already have the dowel and the material, it's a lot cheaper. And you can build the, like if you see an overpass that you really like let's say for a feature part on your model or your shelf layout or diorama, take a bunch of photographs of it and it's just all basic shapes, and scratch up a draft and build your own, and you'll have an abutment or a overpass or bridge that nobody else has, and it'll just be cool just because of the fact that it's unique and you built it, right? Okay, so that should weld up really good. Boy, this weather's perfect for gluing things right now. It's like 25 degrees. I love it for modeling, this kind of weather. Okay, so I'll cap all these off and then we'll see where we go from there. Okay, so these pilings are kind of models in themselves, as I mentioned earlier, which I'm going to have a lot of fun building because they have like the little stair or ladder going up with the little cage around. These are already, you can get these from Plastruct, so they'll just glue right on. I got a whole bunch of these, so I'll probably use those. Then there's railing. You can buy pre-made railing as well. You can make it too, but if you have it, why not use it? Then there's these cranes on here, and then there's this big pad on the front, which I have another better photograph of, but there's this box that mounts on the front, and then a big rubber bushing right here. So this big box is rounded. So what I'm going to do is I took the same circumference as these piles, okay, and then I just drew it up rough, and then I compassed in, the size of the circle, like that. And then I take this Olfa circle cutter with the little blade on here, circle cutter, okay, and then all I do is I just scribe. You don't have to cut right through, remember, you're just scribing a mark, right? Just scribing through the surface of the plastic so you can snap it. A couple of passes works good. The thicker the material, the more passes it helps. Okay, and then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to cut. I want to do a demo first because I want to see how deep I want it on the pile. So I'll just cut one there, and then I'll just cut one here, like that. And I won't need the straight edge for that. Then I'll just cut this one down the center, like that. And then just snap it right. And then just rock this piece back and forth like that. Okay, so sides and front of box, upper and lower, right? I'll trim those to size. That can be trimmed easily until I get the right size that I want. And then what I'll do is I'll mount that on there. I'll make a composite piece first just to see how it looks. This will probably get trimmed right here and somewhere in here, but just make them large. Remember how I said all the way through all my tutorials, whoops, remember what I said all the way through my tutorials, you make everything that you're not sure about oversized if you can. Obviously this is the right circumference, but these are too large here, but that's okay, because once I get it sort of a couple of dry runs there, then I'll establish the size. I'll go like this, right? And then I'll cut that, cut that. Okay, that looks better. Okay, so I'm going to clean the bottom of this plate up now so I can get these cylinders nice. This one here, you see all this gray here? That was from pencil graphite on 600 sandpaper. Just rubbed it down and it left a stain like that. It doesn't matter anyway, this is going to get painted, but if you're wondering why it's gray. But that's the one cylinder done, see? It's all plastic now. Both ends. Okay, so now that the cylinder is already skinned and capped, I just want to take a piece of 10 thou by 60 thou, number 103 by Evergreen strip, okay? 10,000, very thin. And you can see here, and I've just tacked a piece on right here. See in behind there, there's the seam, right? So I just tack on the top first. Like I do this often when I run straight lines. Just tack it and let it set up like that so that you can move it around. You put a bit of tension on it, see? Okay? And then when you go to glue it, you can just put a bead under there and just lay it down like that. Okay, so this is how I make multiple parts, you know, when I got to make a lot of them. Look, when you're making small parts like this, there's lots of ways of doing it, right? You can draft up squares and circles, do it all on one sheet, scribe it all up, you know, if you know the exact size of the template that you want, and this is the one I want right here, which I cut out of here, like by studying the photos and then realizing that, you know, this little box that goes on here, like this, okay, is pretty small. So I don't need all of this circumference, you know what I mean? But so I cut them in half. So what I did was I made a template and then I used a very sharp pencil and I just traced on a whole bunch. I mean, I only need 6, right? So I'm going to cut, you know, 12. Like, I don't care. It's just a small amount of plastic, but I want to have lots of selections. I can pick my 6 best ones. Okay, so I'll just take it like this. I'll just lay it across there like that. Cut. Sorry. Cut. See that line there? It doesn't matter, like that line doesn't look square to the edge of the plastic, but the piece is perfectly square once it's cut out. See? So there's the upper and lower plate of my first box, and I'll just cut out the rest like that, and then I'll just frame these up. I'll put one there. I'll just take my framing stock, like a square, like rectangle, and I'll just glue up, and I'll build my box. Okay, so see, I cut enough for an extra one. I only need 3 of these. 1, 2, 3. I always make extras, right? I know I repeat myself when I say that, but you'll be thanking yourself when you do it later, because you get to pick the best of the best parts, right? It's the way it is in this game. Nobody's perfect enough to get every single component perfect. It never happens that way. And when you're building like in a coefficient manner, like, because like time is an economy, like a speed build, but I don't mean like rushing. I just mean you just get into a momentum. It's always good to make extra parts, because then you don't have to go back and go, oh geez, I got to redraft, I got to recircle cut, I got to, right? Just make extras and then throw them in your parts bin or whatever, and you can use them for scrap later. Okay, so and if you find if the parts sort of run out a bit, because sometimes when you push them into the corner, you know, you get stuff in there and they don't run at a right angle. So while they're still soft, just grab your little square, right, and just bend, just push and bend them a bit, right, because they'll stay soft for a while. And you can re-square them up like that with your fingers, see? There's one that's ready to go for sides now. Okay, so to finally box these in, I don't want to waste this here. I got all these extra back plates, you know, that I cut. So rather than try to cut them to exact size again, right, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put them up like that and just glue these on. I can square them up easier too, right? I'll show you what I mean. So and then I'll just trim them up with my Olfa knife after, because I want this piece here, like, see with the arrow pointing down, I don't want to cut right at the apex, or the corner of the apex here of the curve. I want to cut it a little bit proud, because, and then cut a little shave just with the number 11 blade, a little bit of an angle there, so it fits nice and flush around the circumference of the cylinder here, right? Okay. Otherwise, what I'll end up with is this kind of thing. So here's the cylinder, let's say, and then when the piece goes on, the side piece, it'll be like that, right? And I don't want that. I want to have it like that. So in order for it to be like that, that curved point apex is right there. Okay? I don't want this butt joint. I want it, so this has to go further. So with this here, I'll just cut these later, like right about here. And I'll just shave it, clean it up with a knife, and just dry fit it a few times so it has a nice tight seam on the cylinder here. Okay? Okay, so I got these 3 columns here. All right, they're coming together, the barge columns, and so there's a little bit of trim here I just pointed out to you. Okay, this is just a blow up photo of, or a zoomed in photo of this is the one on the side. The ones in front of the barge slipper to each side in front of the hydraulic gates are actually very similar. But this one has more detail, like this cage stairwell, or ladder, actually, and then the railings, and they got these winches and cranes up here. It's kind of neat little subject to model, and then it's got some clevis plates here on the side for ropes and chains. And then further down it's neat because there's a big sort of slab that sits on the front, which I'll be modeling too, and you can see the little ring bolts here, or ring clevises as well, welded on there, and I'm not sure what those are there, but anyway, it'll be a nice little standalone feature model on the water there. So there's a ladder going up, and then there's a trim right here I want to add. See this little trim right here? So I just started them all. So this is all I do is just start the one side first, just leave a little excess, and then I don't push that down yet. Like, don't put any glue there yet, because otherwise it'll break right here. Remember how I mentioned that? Just let it bend and let it sort of sit. I usually give 2 passes with the brush, because the first pass softens the plastic, and then the second one, see, it's still not glued there. Okay, that's okay though. I don't want to do that yet, because if you get too much in there, it'll soften that and it'll break on the corner. This is a common sort of technique you'll notice me doing, tagging stuff. I call it tagging the strip. You don't just spread glue along the whole subject and then glue it down. You just glue the tail first, right? And you just start it like just at that one point right there and let it overhang. Cut a little excess, see? There'll be a little excess, it's okay. There's always going to be waste in this game. And then once you get that going, see, there's 2 out of the way there. And you can really get into a zone with this stuff, you know. You'd end up building your own structure in a pretty much in the same amount of time that you build a big Walther's kit. A lot of the Walther's kits are pretty nice, actually. I wouldn't mind building a few. I did back in the day, a few of them, but they make nice kits for sure. But you know, when you do a Walther's kit, somebody else has done it too, right? Nobody else has done this kit. It's one of a kind, right? And you can build one of a kind as well. Okay, now this is how I do this. I don't cut the piece to length. Just get some glue started to the end there. Fold that over. This glue's great. It grabs really fast. Once you get into it, using this very thin solvent, it sets really quick. Helps to give it a pre-bend too, like that, just a pre-bend. Okay. Okay, so in this clip I'd like to talk about the barge piles. And once again, I want to just talk about, taking photos of your favorite subject and then, sort of deriving a sketch from it and conceiving it in your mind, or just putting together, a workable drawing, perhaps, to get a model like this. And I mentioned on the earlier episode about, taking rough measurements like ratios off a photograph. Like this is just a zoomed in view. And let me just talk about like photography for 1 second. Like I'm just an amateur photographer, so, just a general hobby interest, which is good enough for my purposes. But when you take photographs of a subject that you want to model, make sure you take them in high resolution, like meaning like a large raw image, if you have the SD card. And I'll tell you why. Because if you don't, you won't be able to zoom in. Like this photograph originally would have looked like, well, I don't have a sample right there, but like for example, this photograph here, it doesn't, I mean, it looks okay. There's detail that I can zoom in from this side. I was over on the shoreline, like on a pier kind of, like almost an eighth of a mile away. And when I took this picture and kept it as a raw image, which is a fairly large image, when I zoomed in, it still stayed fairly like sharp enough for, good modeling purposes, so that I could see all this detail here, right? And stuff up in here, and then this side of the ramp. So if you don't shoot in high resolution, when you zoom up the picture, it's just going to pixelate and you won't have any detail at all. So that's why I have a large hard drive or SSD, because of all the photos, Like even with a photo like this, which I didn't take, I got this off of Google Images. If I zoom this in, this all goes blurry, like I don't get much detail here. So this is as good as this photo gets. If I, like, the more I zoom in to it, it just pixelates out, right? But on the other hand, if I use this photo, which I took way at the very beginning of the ramp approach, way back, I could keep on zooming till the cows come home. Like even onto this little, I was able to interpret this little 45-degree brace underneath this ramp here, and all this detail I can zoom in again like this and crop it and get all the detail I need to interpret for a napkin drawing, or just a field sketch, or a rough draft to build the model from. Like I can even zoom in so close to these posts that I know they're I-beams, they're steel I-beams. Like, they might look like wooden posts now, but I can zoom in and interpret that, and textures and things, okay? However, in this case, I don't have a lot of good angles for these barge piles, right? But, you can never have enough photos, as they say, and sometimes you can have too many photos. Like you'll get into a build and then you'll come across a photo and go, oh no, I didn't know all this detail was here. Like I didn't know there was a beam, an I-beam here with a rubber bushing with a bolt, eye going through with a clevis attached, and the chain is a type of shock absorber. Like I just figured that out last night when I zoomed in on this photo. Like this was a photograph way back, like, from another pier that I set up on the railing to get the camera still, and I was able to zoom in this close and pick up on all these details in behind where I couldn't see from any other angle, right? Like Google Earth won't give you this information, right? Like they don't have the resolution. And then all these railings here, and then there's two cranes here with a couple clevises here. I want to model all this, right? And then, this ladder with the cage, just two sections on the top here like that. So this is a model in itself, right? So this would be the angle that you would sort of see it at, the backside like this, see? And then I was also able to pick up this detail here. That's half of this, because the tide is here, the water level. And then there's a black bushing, kind of a big, huge rubber bushing, which, I just mocked up with this. Like this, like, don't pay attention to this. Like this isn't even dimensionally right for this model. It's close though, but so like this is kind of how this front plate here, you know, the barge bumps up against. Okay, and then there's one down below here too, which I didn't know until last night when I started, you know, examining my photographs from every angle, right? So this sort of sits on the water like that, and then this, you know, the barge bangs up against this. But there's other stuff going on here that I want to model that's important, because this is going to stand, you know, alone, like as a feature in front of the barge ramp, which is kind of cool. And then I can contrast this steel pile up against some wooden ones and so on, right? And so this actual piece sort of hangs, like it hangs off this pile with some chain and clevis and nautical kind of, it has a nautical blend to it, like even the chain has, you know how they have the center pin, like if you draw like a chain link, you know, it looks like this, right? And then there's sort of a center pin, you know, which I don't have this kind of chain. I think you can get it, but it looks like that, you know, like that's what nautical chains are like, right? They're reinforced in there. And that's on this, I can tell by the photo. But anyway, so I have these three barge piles sort of roughed up now, built, okay? Because there's two, there's one in front of each hydraulic tower, like on each side of the front end of the barge ramp. But they're not exactly the same. The gear, the hanging gear is the same, I'm pretty sure, for these slabs that go on the front like this. But there's no railings and that I can see, or ladder work on these, because I think you can access them from the side of the ramp. But this one here has a bunch of railings on the top and so on. So what I did was so some stuff you can sort of shoot from the hip. Like I knew that 7/8 dowel would work with this. It was either 3/4, 1 inch, or 7/8, right? And I decided with 7/8. It just looked right. You know, I mean, whether it's correct to the prototype exact, I mean, it could be out 6 inches or a foot, you know. I doubt a foot though. But anyway, that's been established, right? Okay. And then these blocks, now I might change up this cylinder here because that looks a bit heavy. Even though that might be prototypical, I want to take it down one more size, maybe. Just a little bit smaller than that. And I couldn't see the shape of these, so I mean I can telescope three sections here to have a smaller diameter and a mid-size and then a wide one in the middle, which would add a bit of interest, but that's to be determined a little bit later. And then, so I have this drawing here, and I finally figured this out like last night. Okay, and this is really important, like rather than just, you know, glue something like that on and paint it white. I mean, you can do that too if you just want to, like if you're an N scale, you'd probably do it like this, right? But the advantage to HO and O especially, man, this mono would be killer in O scale. But in HO, there's sort of the compromise either way, right? You know, there's sort of the happy medium. So you can see this is the barge pile drawing that I just did this morning from the photo. It's not to scale, okay? It's just a napkin drawing to build from, because I already have the dimensions, right? Like I have the dimensions right here. Like this is how that looks, like that. Okay, I mean it's close, but it's a little more fat, the drawing, just for the purposes of sorting out details. Okay, and then you know the rubber plunger goes on here, you know. So right up in here, there's this I-beam that I found, but I don't have really good references. I can sort of see part of it right here. See, it comes out like, I don't know if it's got a circumference cut into the beam. It looks like it sort of wraps. You know, you can tell sort of by the shadow, sort of. That's pretty simple. I can use the I-beam section for that. Use the flange to glue to this pole or cylinder, and then cut and put a hole there for that rope. But this here, at first I thought it was just a clevis, but I can see that it's not. There's actually a beam here, and then there's this big rubber block. I presume that's a rubber block with a a big bolt here, probably a nut on there, so I can use a larger O-scale Grant line nut and bolt casting for that. That would be prominent. And then there's a rod, and it shapes into a clevis here with a chain attached to, right? So I drew that with the front view and a side view, and that's the way it goes. And this slab here, this piece here, which, right, hangs off, like it actually hangs from this chain, right? There's one on each side, right? On the side view here, you can see it's on an angle in it, and there's a couple of clevises welded to this, like big, I guess it's a big steel plate with rubber, big heavy rubber 1-inch or 2-inch slabs on the front, which I have a good photos of. Which will make for, you know, a nice contrast with the red sort of primer or rust color, and then the chain work and the black and so on, and then all the tide fade. You know, it'd be a nice little model, right? So that's what I'm going to do, and I'm going to build from that. And then there's a ladder. Like, this is just on the side pile. This has quite a bit of detail. It has a ladder with a cage that starts here, and it's got some railings and a couple of cranes. So I really like this feature right when you walk in on the model. It has this real nautical sort of impact right away that will grab you, and then as the eye moves over to the barge slip ramp, you know, you get that feel, the transition into the railroad kind of thing. So I'm really looking forward to these and as models, especially this one to build. Okay. Okay, so for this particular I-beam here, support, this beam right here, for these bushings where the chains hang. Use this here. This is plastic. There's an equivalent of evergreen. I just don't know which one it is right now, but I have this, which is another product. Both plastic and evergreen are in my kit, so just if you were wondering. So this is 90544, and it's H column. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to cut the pieces proud, again, much larger than they're going to be in the finished size, right? Like the finished size is probably going to be something like this. Okay. So once again, I cut things proud because when you're trying to center circumferences, curves, whatever, if you try to cut it exactly to the size and you glue it on, one side will run short. Like, you run into issues like that. If you try to cut every part, this is why people get discouraged and scratched when they go, oh, I got to cut out each individual part perfectly. No, you don't. If you've been following this series, you realize it's not as difficult as people imagine it to be. It's actually fairly simple if you just follow some basic rules. So anyway, I want to get this to fit in here like that, see? Okay, so one of the trickiest things to do is to cut cylinders totally square. Now, there are many ways to do this. You can set up a jig. You can use, you know, these pipe cutters. K&S, you just slide the tube in there, and then you just tighten her down, and then just rotate this. But you know, you get run out with these too. Like this thing worked good for a while, but I don't trust it anymore. So, or you can, you know, run it like a jig like that. You know, just run a line and cut it by eye. I like to cut tape, like in this case 7mm wide tape, and then wrap it and make sure it squares up when you wrap it. And then what I do is I just make it like this. Good old eyeball method. Now, if you're doing longer pieces, you can basically, you know, tape them up and just touch them on a disc sander. But that's tough to do small rings like that. So I find the tape method works the best, and then you can just tweak them up a bit, you know, with a bit of sandpaper. Okay, so I got these top rubber bushings installed. These I haven't cut to length yet. Like they'll be cut you know, when I determine the width, I'll just saw them and sand them flush. See, this one's longer. Right, that way I know they'll be nice and symmetrical and to the size that I want without having to cut them too short, right? And then having to replace it. It's always good to make your pieces proud like this. Let them overhang and then cut them down to size once they're mounted. Anyway, so I need a half round here because it's sitting in the water, because this is the water here. So I cut a whole bunch of these, right? So what I'll do is I'll just take one of these and then just cut it in half. And then that'll get mounted on there like that. Okay, so this principle applies to almost every aspect of scratch building like this, just capping ends of I-beams and squares and blocks, etc. You know, in this case, the wrap tube, you know, capping excess, remember cutting it round, shaping it nice, right? Excess, excess, excess. That, I mean, that's the way I do it. I mean, I'm sure there's people that like to cut every part exactly like first and fit it all in, and that's great to model that way too, right? It's a really good method. But I like to, like, I can build quicker and more economically when I overdraft like the part, like when I cut the part out and then cut back. Like here, I just want to cap this. And also, by the way, like this is another reason why I love number 11 blades, because every part that I pick up, like a small part, I use my number 11 blade, right? It works every time. I built almost the whole model this way. Anyway, so see, I just put a rough cap on there, see? And then when that's cured, right, so I can just flood the backside a bit and underneath, just so you know it's got a really solid bond. Okay? And there's a bit of flash on the end of this I-beam. It doesn't matter. You don't need to clean it off because it's just going to turn into a weld anyway, like it's just extra plastic, right? So I just line it up there, put a good blob of cement on there so you can move it around a bit and line it up like just the sides here and here. And then once it's cured, you just come along with your nibblers or your knife or your sanding block and just clean it up. You know, maybe you'll leave this part overhanging right here and just clean the top off, you know. I mean, I don't know. Like, it depends on what the shape of, you know, that beam is. Like, it's hollow underneath here because there's this cable pin or a rod that's coming out of there. And I believe they're open on the front. So in this case, I'm probably just going to cut an opening here. like this, so you can see it. So I'll cut a little bit of an opening there like it is on the prototype. And then I'll just use, and then I'm going to cap the top here. After I trim that up, I'll just put a cap right over top the full length. And then I'll cut a solid piece for like a rubber block, and then I'll just drill a hole down through and then slide the rod and do the nut and bolt casting on the top, and then attach the chain that'll run down to the backstop, you know. Okay. Okay, so I want to talk about these barge piles now, which are turning out to be a lot of fun for me. I never really realized at first, when I first sort of took this project on, like I looked at these, right, and I thought, okay, well I got to model one of these for sure, and then the two at the front of the ramp slip. And so I'm quite pleased the fact that the ones that run along the side of the barge when it comes into the slip, they're actually quite nice little models, like with chain and rope and clevises and ladders and cages and some winches and stuff. So this one's going to stand alone, so it's going to be a really cool model. Like it'll sort of be right there, you know. Like when you walk into the room, like that opening scene, and then it'll sort of, as the eye moves from the left to the right, you know, you move into the sort of the barge slip, and you know, with the background of the trees. I'm really excited about it. Anyway, so as you can see, I've got the three to this stage right now, and now I'm going to build these slabs here. They're these sort of buffer stops, right? And then you can see like they hang off of these piles, you know, like they're steel. These ones look to be steel, welded steel. Anyway, so you can see part of this that buffer slab like in here in this big heavy chain gear. Like they're really cool, right? Because they sort of hang on the front of these. Like they're these big rubber, I presume they're rubber type bushings, so when the barge slams up against it, right, that's sort of a shock absorber effect. Then there'll be some really neat chain detail coming down from both ends, which I wasn't sure about this on the photo to interpret this. Like I couldn't get a good enough, like I couldn't really, well, sort of, you can see it there, but I don't have anything at the front that shows it. So I just built it sort of faithfully as much as I could to the prototype. Anyway, I did extend them out here because I think it looks good that when they're sort of extended out and this plate is there, you can sort of see them from this angle, the chain kind of going down and disappearing in behind here. But now here's the decision. So this is 80 thou, right? Like I don't think this is going to be thick enough because these are look quite heavy. Like that looks to me like you know, that's well over a foot there. Like that's got to be, man, like, because those are heavy barges, eh? Like that's got to be probably maybe 2 feet or something, right? And I know that 80 thou is about 9 inches in HO. So I think what I'm going to do, like instead of just going with this, like here's the I-beam profile, like this is the idea. All right, so I just lay in that I-beam profile there. Glue that on the side to have that look, you know. But what I'm going to do is I think I'm going to glue 2 pieces together. I'm just going to laminate 2 pieces. And then I'm going to use this, wider stock, which is this one here, number 275 I-beam. And I'll just have to lay it on like that. And I think that heavier piece will look better because these things are pretty beefy. I think, you know, that looks about right, I think, compared to the photo. You know what I mean? So that's what I'll do. Okay, so I'm going to attach this I-beam number 276 3/16. And I'm going to attach it to the side of these plates here that I've laminated together. 80 thou plastic. And so rather than have it just sit on the edge like that, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to plane a bevel. I bet you didn't know you can plane this stuff. Actually, if you have a really sharp little plane like this, it actually works really well. It's like, it's just like wood, this plastic. It planes beautifully. Okay. Now when you lay this on, it sits in there nice. Okay. Okay, so now we have these two pieces of channel, and once again, remember, look how I cut them oversized, see? Right, okay. So I've just put a chamfer on there, a couple passes on each side, 45 on the corner, rough, just by hand, just by eye. You don't have to set up a jig for that. And what I'm going to do is take this channel, okay? I'm just going to flood this channel now with some solvent cement. Put a good flood in there so it's wet. A little extra won't hurt. And then I just take this, I'm going to drop it in there like that. Push down a bit. There it is. Okay. It looks just like this one. And then when it's dry, just going to take that, cut it just a teeny weeny bit proud. Okay, so here's the barge pads, right? And the I-beam is glued in place, nice, see? So they were cut proud, right? Remember, and then you just slice them off and then just put them on your little sanding jig table or whatever. Give them a couple of strokes. Nice and flush and clean. And then I cut these, I believe they're 188 by 20 thou. So I'm just gonna put a little flood on top of there like that. And then I'm just going to press this down on there. Once again, you can see that, you know, I cut them proud, right? So they overrun the ends like that. And then you can choose to clean them up flush to the web of the I-beam there, or you can, you know, just knife them out clean if you want. Then you always get a really nice finish on the model part when you do it this way. It'll really clean up the end there, see? And then when I go to mount the hardware, you know, stuff like that, right, it's got a nice gluing surface. Okay. Okay, so I'll show you how I make these little cushion blocks. Here, like they go on here, like you see where the nut is? Right here. And they're on a little bit of an angle, right? Like that, they go through, and then there's a rod there. There's a rod that goes all the way through with a clevis on the end, and the chain attaches to it, and it goes down on an angle to the bottom of the big barge pads, right? So I thought I might as well add that detail because there isn't a whole lot going on these two by the hydraulic gates. And then the one standalone, I want to try to get as much detail on there as I can because it's a single model, right? So what I did was I just took some of this number 166, 80 thou by 125, and then I just laid it on the cutting jig here, and I just started to scrape like this, right? Just freehand. Just leave a long length so you can hang on to it. Right, and so I made a bit of a bevel there, just an eyeball bevel, and then cut it off, left a tail to hang on to, and then I just marked and drilled holes on an angle, see? So I make all these blocks, but I leave them on here, and then as each one, when I need one, then I just take it like this. I just cut one off there like that, right? Okay. One of them goes right here. Just like that. And then I just drop in one of these Grant line nut and bolts castings. I just shave the pin off fairly short, and then when I drill through, so I'll re-drill through here like this on a bit of an angle. Once again, you just eyeball it, right? You don't need to measure the angle. Just after you do it a few times, right, you'll be able to see it fine. And then I'll run a dowel, a piece of plastic dowel through there from the bottom to glue into that block, and then the nut on top, and then I'll just attach a clevis to that. I'll show you how I'm going to do that. And then I can attach the chain to it. It just gives it a nice, functional look, right? And then the pad sits on like this, see? Okay, so these are the pads that go, well, they're big rubber pads that mount on these slabs. So I'm gonna just use a drill to make the detail where the bolts would hold them on. They'd be quite large. So I've just marked 10mm increments, and I want to, like, how do you run a line on here? Well, you can do it many ways. You can just stack them all together like this, and then line up your ruler and do it that way and draw a line. Or I often just take my finger like that, and I hold the pencil here, and I just use my finger as a guide, and I just go like that. Okay. Good enough. All right. Okay, so I got all my lines marked out here where I want to put these, just a little perforation with a drill to simulate bolt hole patterns on these rubber pads that sit right here, like here's in this photo. See, here's the barge slip pile and pad, and then on the front there's these big heavy rubber strips mounted on, and I would say every few feet there, maybe 2.5, 3 feet, there's 2 bolt holes holding them on. So I figured the increments were roughly like there'd be 9 series of holes here. I mean, it would be relative to how high the tide is, when I'm looking at the photo or trying to interpret it. So 9 or 10 will work. So what I'm going to do to simulate that is I'm going to take my drill, and in this case, I believe this is a 9 thou or 1/32, or even 1/16, depending on the look you want, right? So what I'm going to do is I just place my drill on the mark. Obviously I'll get into a zone here off camera, and this will go quick, and I just go 1, 2, 3. That's it. Okay? 1, 2, 3. And it leaves just enough of a mark so when you paint it and put a wash on it, those will come out nice. And I'll have those little, with a pin wash, they'll just pop, okay? Okay, so here's the pile pads. You can see the detail there. Just the light, removal with 3 or 4 twists on the drill, remember? It didn't take long, and I ended up, like, I made lots of extra. If you make lots of extra, and I know I stress this over and over again, but it's important, right? Like, because one of the stumbling blocks to scratch building before people get started is that they assume they got to make every single little part perfectly first. No, you don't. Like, you build on strips like this, like, and then, you know, you just lay it on, right? Like that was glued on, and I overrun. Nibble off later, nibble off later. And then everything comes out beautiful and square, right? Everything on here was done that way. Okay, so then these mount on the front like this, see? And if I need to tweak for square, I mean, they're nice and square now, but this, you know, so these are getting close. Okay, so on this clip here, I want to talk about something very important. First of all, I want to talk about finding the position on a model for a cleat, let's say, for example. Okay, and in relation to the ratio, you know, that I've taught before about using a photograph to establish the ratio on the model to make sure that, well, at least the parts that you apply look reasonable according to the prototype, okay? As you can see, this photograph, this is just a blow up, right? I took this photograph from 1/8 of a mile away, or maybe just under that. And this is how much I was able to zoom in. Because I shot it with a raw image, I could zoom in and I still get fairly good clarity. But if I get any closer than this, it really gets out of whack, the focus. But so, okay, so let me just show you the model here, okay? Up against this photograph. So this section here, see this flange right here? This flange right here and this flange right here is this flange on the model and this flange on the model right here. So I want to establish where this cleat here mounts on this pad, okay, which is right here. So this sits like this, okay? So I want to figure out where does this go on here when this is flush and mounted to this pile. So this is what I was trying to explain before, that just because this is 20 millimeters, this space right here on the model, doesn't mean it's 20 millimeters on the photograph. I'm just going to take a ratio. So I took lines here from this flange. I see this line here, drew a line across, and then I drew a line to the center of that flange where this clevis mounts to, which I want to establish on here, right? And then I just took my ruler on the photograph. I go, oh, look, that's 23, like let's just say it's 23 millimeters. Then I'm going to go 23 millimeters, 23 millimeters. Okay, it's not quite there, but it's enough for me to establish a 1/3 ratio of space. Not levels, but just space, right? So I know that this clevis, in relation to these two blocks that I pointed out with the flange, is at 1/3 within this space. Like, I know that. You can do this with any photograph for building any model that you want. Like, I don't care what it is. Unless it's, you know, a small little, you know, exotic Formula One engine or something, you know, that would be crazy. But I'm sure you could do it if you had enough photo references and you really applied yourself. But anyway, so I know now that this particular clevis that I'm going to mount is at 1/3. Okay, so what I did was I took this pad and I established right here, okay, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 space, right? Now this just happens to be 20 millimeters. So when I put like I measure the 1/3s, And look what I get. I get 60 millimeters. Oh, isn't that nice? That's an easy equation, isn't it? Because now I know 1/3 of 60 is 20 millimeters. So I just make 20 millimeter marks, and I know that the 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 bracket where the clevis goes is going to go right there on the side of the model, within a few inches off the prototype, give or take. But who cares? No one's ever going to know, right? Like, we don't have blueprints for this. So that's, I have built the whole barge model. Every model I build, every model that I build, like including the grain elevator from Glover Road, was built the same way. All from doing this ratio interpretation to a draft drawing or right off the photo. Like in this case, I don't need to draw this, although I did draw this because this was more important to me to, you know, to try to figure out what I was dealing with. So I drew the chain and, you know, the placement of these rubber buffer stops here, and but I don't need to draw the bracket. And even though I drew the bracket here below this box, see, this drawing's not to scale either. It's just a napkin drawing, right? But see, this box here was just a rough draft just to get the idea. That's right here, right? And see how the flange shows below the box here? Well, that's not right, is it? But I hadn't gotten there yet. This flange here, bracket's way above this. See? It's not like that at all. But this is not necessarily a drawing that I build from. This is to get a general interpretation of what is going on with the photo until I get to this particular part of the build. So now I know where that bracket's going to go. Okay. I know it's going to go right here, like that, on that mark at 20 millimeters on the model. Lots of quick clevises. Once again, right, just take the strip, mark some increments, drill some holes. You know, nothing fancy. You can do a center line like this. Right? You don't have to measure, and if you want, that's fine. Just use your finger. Learn to hold a pencil like that. I've been doing this. I mean, that's what carpenters do. Finished carpenters do that. They don't use a ruler for something like that. And then just mark holes. Alright, and you'd be surprised. If you want to do multiple parts, you can bang them off in no time flat. And furthermore, who cares about the run out? In this case, I want this offset. But I mean, who cares if your drills run out a bit? You're gonna make 20 or 30 of them. You know, if you need 10, right? Just pick the best ones. So these brackets that mount to the clevis. Round them off. So here's another little tip if you want to make up, mounting brackets with a flange already built on them. This is just an I-beam, right? That looks like this. I just drilled a bunch of holes spaced away. And then I'll just lay this I-beam on here like this, okay? On the sandpaper stick again, remember? Because it's not going to slide, is it? Okay, then I'll just come along with a knife. In this case, I use a 3/4 Olfa knife, which I build most of my models with, almost entirely. I think I mentioned earlier before that I do like the number 11 blade. I use most of my life, but the last 20 years or so I use mostly this for most of my work. And I'll show you why. Because, well, it's just more, like it's tougher, it's more robust. I can, like if I need to build in quick, I need sharp, I can snap this off and go to the next blade. And then just scrape this, see? If you want to bring any profile down, just scrape it with a blade like that. It'll make it nice and smooth. So you end up with that, right? And then I can just basically cut. I want to cut a angled bracket. Okay, so remember how I talked about repetition? So you make a lot more than you ever need. And when you get into the flow of things, it doesn't take really any longer to make 30 of them or 13 of them than it does to make 3. And you don't make them individually. You build them on the strip and you cut them off like this. See, there's the I-beam. You drill the holes, shave the flange off, make the angle cuts, flip it over. You can see the cut mark through the plastic. It's a lighter white or whatever, and slice, 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 and you get all this. And even if there is a little bit of something you don't like, we'll just pick another one, right? So these are going to go right on the top here of these pads like this, okay? And they look kind of nice actually because they're on the top, so you'll see them. I don't know whether the prototype looks like this, but I'm pretty sure they are. So that'll just sit like that, see? And then they use these to tie off, like the ropes off the barge. The ropes that come off of the pile are going to come off a side bracket right here that I've made. They're a little bit different looking. They're an I-beam run this way, see? And they'll get mounted on the side like that. And then there's a rope that hangs off of here and it hooks up over top of these brackets or clevises when they're not in use. Kind of cool, eh? Okay, so I thought I'd just throw this in quick. All your little offcuts, your little nibbles and trims and plastic shavings, keep all of it in a bag. Because you know what you can use this for? You know those, when you have your very expensive aero gondola? Or, whatever, right? You can make a really nice scrap metal load from all this that's unique, right? That's like you don't have to think it through and cut each one. Like this is over a long period of time, and they just make fantastic fine scale loads. You can just soak them in a little Tupperware tray in isopropyl rust colors over and over again, lay it out on wax paper, parchment paper. You'll end up with a really, really cool load that you can use some diluted matte medium to fasten onto the top of a plate for your gondolas. Okay? Okay, so I just want to show you how I made these little clevises and these little ring bolts to attach the chain to. And why am I doing that? Well, I'll show you here. So here's the first one that I've built and I've almost finished. Okay. So this ring or clevis, which in the real world would have been threaded here, and that's the top of it, that nut right there. So I drilled a hole and reamed it out with a knife a bit more because I'm going to want this to go up in there to glue that. But I'll cut that off. I'll cut this to length at the end when I get the tension right. Because this is a heavy slab hanging off here and this chain needs to be tight. Okay? Needs to be tight like that, not like that. Okay? That's why I attached to the bottom here. That's why I made this tapered here and I leave this long length. Remember how I told you about modeling? Put that into practice. Model everything proud and long in this game. If you want to get things square and get things to shore up nice, right? That's a good practice to get into because you can always nibble it off later if it's long. If it's too short though, you got to make another one. Which again explains why if you need 6 you make 12, right? So that's what I need to do, and then you can see how I attached it with a ring bolt here too, and I'll show you how I made those. Okay, but first I'll show you how I made the flange. So I made it out of 4x12 HO stock. But for the purposes of this demo, I'm going to show you on a bigger piece. This is how I made it. So I decided, well, okay, so it's got to have a hole in it. It's going to be rounded right here. So let's put a center line right here. Let's run this angle or return down to the where it'll transition into a dowel, let's say right here. Not a dowel, but a rod. And I'm going to make it this long. All of them. I'm going to make 12 like this. Then what I'm going to do is take my knife and I'm just going to go to work here and I'm going to make a bunch of these. And when I get into it and nobody's looking, it's going to go fast. Cookie cutter. Okay, I'm going to cut the length off. This is why I like a big Olfa 3/4 knife. Try and do this with a number 11 blade. Good luck with that. Okay, and so there I go. There's one right there. Then I just take my nail file and I clean it up with a nail file, right? So I get a whole bunch of these. This is the size I determined. Okay, so now how do I attach with this ring bolt? So I take number 30 thou rod and I figure out by bending them. I just cut a length rough, just eyeball a length and bend it like that. But I would bend it, if I was you, I would bend it over a round piece of metal rod, in this case a file, first. It helps to soften the plastic, right? And you won't pinch it. Okay, so when you do squeeze it, it won't break. You'll get one that'll break for every 30 that you do, or 20 or so. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to feed this onto the chain. Now you can pre-flange this or pre-squeeze this ahead of time, like one side. I went and made a whole bunch here, look, and did flange on both sides. Now I can't get it into the chain. Such is the nature of this game. So just give it just a light squeeze, like not too much. See that? There's a nice little flange. So you can cheat up a bit more on it if you want. And then if you don't like it because it's too long, you can just nibble it off like that, see? Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed it into this chain. That's a challenge for you. Like that. Okay, just like that one. So I'm making 6 of these. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this like that, and now I'm going to squeeze this end. Like that, see? Maybe a bit more. And then I'm going to bend it like that in my fingers, and then I'm going to take my slab or my pad. I'm going to put a dab of glue here. I'm going to take it like that. And I'm just going to squeeze that. And then I'm going to just pinch it off with these sprung tweezers. Like that. Okay. Dab of glue on there, and that'll hold good. So I'll do all that with the 3 pads that I have, because I want to establish the length of the chain though. So I'm going to use this one here first, because in this case this chain's going to be too long. All right, it's too long. So I'm going to use this one as a measurement, and I'm going to pre-cut the chain first before I do this clevis work. I just wanted to show you how I did that though. Okay, so I just want to talk about a little bit of some nautical rigging. So this is just stuff left over from my model ship days, and you can get this readily, like from Billings or you know, Corral. Like there's a lot of model, you know, wooden model ship kits and accessories you can get, and that's what this is. All right, that's like all the different sizes of rope that I've chosen to use for the, you know, for the big ropes here that they have, that they throw over to the barge to tie the barge off, you know, against here. Okay. So a little bit of nautical shipbuilding involved here too. It's kind of neat.